Hello, everyone, and here is a radical thought for you. You are loved and you are saved. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shelf Life. This is Simran, and this is my podcast, Shelf Life. We talk about books, their philosophies, but most importantly, our personal relationship with a book. And I believe I owe an explanation for where I was last week and why there was no video. The truth is, this is the second time I'm filming this episode. And weirdly enough, I'm wearing the same clothes I wore the first time. So I guess I just wanted to maintain a sense of, I don't know, consistency. I just wanted to pretend like everything was working out fine. But anyway, the reason why I couldn't put out an episode last week was because I had like a sort of a technical glitch where I shot the video and I edited it and everything was ready, and then suddenly I just lost all the data. So I didn't have the recording anymore, and honestly, all of it sort of went to waste. And I had this moment of breakdown almost where I was in tears and I felt like I felt frustration and I felt anger and I felt pain and I felt all of those emotions. I felt a spectrum of emotions, which led me to just drowning my head um, in like a bucket of water, cold water, and I put my entire head in it, and I was like, I need, I need some amount of just calm right now. I need some cooling down to do, literally. So I did that, and thankfully I was all set. I was completely fine, and I felt like it's not. I wouldn't say that it's not worth it, but I will say that nothing is above your sanity, something that I go by. I live by it, and it just becomes clearer to me, like at every point in my life as I grow older. It just becomes more relevant that there is absolutely nothing that goes above your mental patience and your mental peace, and it just anything that stresses you out to a point where you literally feel like you want to just give up on whatever you're doing. It's not worth it. So I took a break. I took a break. I took the weekend off. I focused on other stuff that I was doing. I managed to finish a book that I was reading. It's part of the reading challenge, in fact. The first book, which is Girl in White Cotton by Avni Doshi. We had discussed it in our Christmas episode. So I managed to finish that, and I finished it like I think yesterday. And there is a lot of there's a lot of stuff going on in my head and a lot of emotions regarding the book, a lot of feelings and opinions that I will probably post it out next week. I mean, I'll probably have an episode on it next week if that works out, because I do have a lot to say about the book, and I would love to discuss it. Because what happens is that most of the books that I discuss on the podcast, it just so happens that they're books that I had read a long time back. They're usually books that I had read years ago, and obviously that left an impact. But I would have read it a long time back, so I don't have that immediate. It's not that immediate emotion that you feel when you finish a book. So all of my, it's like looking at a memory in retrospect. So you form your opinions in retrospect after having sat with the book and read more books perhaps that had a similar theme. So it's not that initial first reaction, uh, which people say is supposed to be it's supposed to be the truest reaction. So yeah, so I just wanted to mention that and clear that out, and I am very happy to be back. It is our first video for the new year. 2020 is officially out of the way, and we are straight into 2021. It's, I believe, by the time this will be out, it'll be January 16th, or maybe even later. Who knows? At this point, I can't trust my I can't trust my laptop. But anyway, this will hopefully be out by January 16th, and we would have been halfway through 2021. So halfway through the first month of 2021. So yeah, I'm very happy that we are here. I'm happy that we've all managed to come here in one piece, and we are hopefully all looking forward to the new year. Coming to the book of this week, Shameless by Nadia Bolz Weber, as you might have guessed. And the reason why, I know I mentioned it in the last episode, but I just want to give a little bit of a backdrop for why I picked this book and why I want to talk about it, even though I had said that we did a lot of nonfiction on this channel, and I wanted to go back to just novels and the beauty of fiction, the mystery of being lost in a completely new world, that a world that you do not inhabit in possibly any way, and being lost in that world, in a completely new world with all of these characters that might or might not be real. I know that we talked about that, but the reason I picked up this book was more personal. I think, um, I might have already mentioned this, but because of academic purposes and because of all of that stuff, um, I I happen to do spend a lot of my time researching. Research becomes a huge part of my existence. It has been so for the past 1 year, I believe. Um, and a lot of that research, it's focused on society. It's focused on either religion or society or ways of just trends that are going on in the world or have happened or have passed their time. So that becomes a huge part of my life. And recently, in fact, because of one of these academic purposes, I'll just say that I'm writing a paper, okay? I'm just gonna make it not so weird. So because of this paper that I'm writing, I had to research a lot about the bad side of the church. By church, I mean, broadly, I mean religion and the structure of religions, major religions around the world. But specifically, I mean the evangelical church. More specifically, I mean the evangelical church in the U.S. But for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to take the church as religion, just as religion, broadly. Um, so I had to do a lot of research on that, and a huge part of that research had to do with what the church does to individuals and the messaging that the church gives out, the doctrine of all of these major religions, the preachers, the leaders, the political leaders even who base their um, how do I put it, who base their campaigns or who base their political identity um, on religion and the doctrines of religion and the stuff that religion stands for. So political leaders who base all of their identity on these religions and stuff, it had a lot to do with that, and why that can be problematic for individuals as a whole, and individuals living in society as a whole. So that became a huge part um, of my research. And when you spend a lot of time on these stuff, and the stuff that is bound to make you sad, the stuff that's bound to make you a little bit um, apprehensive and a little just disappointed is the word. um, you sort of need a break. You feel the need for a break, and I say this it is one of the biggest conflicts I face, that I love reading. I love any sort of reading, fiction or non-fiction. I love knowing about new things and old things and all of that stuff. I love reading. I don't think there's any um, period in my life where I'm not reading. You know, it doesn't have to necessarily be a novel, but I would be reading something at every given time of my life. But when I have to consciously take a break from reading, what I'm reading, that is when things get a little upsetting for me, because I become a little lost. I don't know where to go, right? It's like telling a musician to take a break from music. It's like telling a parent to take a break from parenting. You get what I'm trying to say, right? So that becomes a huge issue. How do you take a break from a something that is work, that you have deadlines for, and b something that you actually like, you actually love, and you actually feel is important and pertinent. But you know what I've realized is that you need breaks regardless of how much you love something, or love someone. You need some time to yourself, you need time to rewind, you need alone time. You deserve that. So, you know, when I was reading all of these horrible things, that the church's teachings on certain subjects, like, say, homosexuality or abortion or premarital sex and all of these things, I was primarily looking at how the church influences people's opinion or view about sex and sexuality, what that can do to your mindset, your overall growth as a person. When I was looking at all of that, it genuinely made me very sad. Um, and I just really needed a breath of fresh air, which is why I picked up this book, because I read it in an article about, the article was something to do with how to be a um, sex positive, queer positive, um, religious person. It was a nice article, but it was very random. And it said somewhere in that article that you should probably pick up this book. And that's how I came to it. I came to Shameless, looking for a break from reading, looking for a break from the cruelties of the world. Um, and I have to say that Shameless in itself, it's, in fact, I have my Goodreads page open here, and there's a woman named Faith who said that um, Shameless is not a book; it is an act of kindness, um, and it is incredible how apt that is for me as well. When I was reading this book, I felt like I was doing myself a favor. I felt like I was giving myself, allowing myself that redemption that I really, really, really needed, and that I didn't even know I needed for the longest time. And I realized that Shameless, in fact, the book talks a lot about, like I said, the church's stances on sex and sexuality, and throughout the years, what that has been. Um, and as I became exposed to more and more of the problematic views uh, that the church has had, and the problematic things that the church has done. For example, one of the things was that there used to be something called a purity manual, which was distributed primarily to girls, of course, teenage girls at that, that told them, why it was important to be quote unquote pure. And by pure, it meant how do you stay away from sex and your carnal desires and all of that stuff. So it focused primarily on that, and it had lengthy descriptions of what happens if you're impure, which is obviously, eternal damnation and hell and fire and all of that. And what happens if how do you stay pure? And of course, it goes into really nasty details, like clothes. You have to sit in a certain way with your legs not so far apart. You have to wear a certain kind of clothing. You can't wear some clothes. You can't do this. You can't speak too loud. You can't draw too much attention to yourself and all of that stuff. But of course, when I read all of that, it is disgusting. But it felt very real. I have at multiple points in my life heard that from multiple people. Um, mostly institutions. I wouldn't say educational, but more than educational as well. Beyond educational as well. So I have heard that too, and I'm sure so many other people like me have had those conversations, um, where these people who are in power, who have authority, will tell you how to dress, will tell you how to do things and say things and not say things. And I realized that throughout my life, I had also internalized a lot of these beliefs, a lot of these teachings. I have no qualms about admitting that I myself had been, I myself had internalized something like homophobia, which is so dangerous. And I know the kind of impact that had on my personal life, where there was this sort of dissonance that I felt, um, not just within myself, but when I met people who were very open about their identities and who felt no sense of shame, who felt no guilt about who they were. I realized the kind of dissonance I felt. I realized the kind of pain I felt for having believed the things that I believed. And most of it happened when I went to college. Um, that that whole period of realizing that so much that you had believed for so long was just a lie. It was just something that was taught to you. It was just something that some bigoted person said to you. But you take that in and you keep that. And what those teachings do is that when you take it in, when you keep it very far inside your heart, you sort of unconsciously or consciously nurture it. You provide a safe space for it. You provide a corner in your heart for that feeling, that belief. And over time, of course, it grows. Like anything, you water anything, you put anything in the ground, it will grow. And that's why they say that you have to be very careful what you sow, um, because you have to face the consequences of what reaps. So so um yeah, it became a huge battle in my life personally, I know that. And so much of it came from the same obsession with purity, the same obsession with uh, being what someone wanted me to be. I wouldn't say God primarily, because it was God, the idea of God, but it was a host of other things. And you know, that is exactly what Nadia talks about in this book. She talks about what the pursuit of good can do to people. And I know how that sounds. You would say that the pursuit of good, of course, it's a very human thing and it's so powerful, and we should be good. We should strive to be good. But instead, she gives you a very potent alternative. She tells you, instead of pursuing good, instead of pursuing, you know, this this having this need for being what someone wants you to be, instead of being good, instead of pursuing good, why don't we pursue grace? And she talks about it. She talks about grace in the sense that, why don't we make more space for ourselves and for others? Why don't we allow others to fail? Why don't we allow others to make mistakes that they are bound to make? Allow them to be everything, the whole spectrum of human behavior. Allow them to be angry, allow them to be disgusted, allow them to be in pain, allow them to be happy, allow them to be cruel at times, allow it. But also at the same time, provide them the space to be grace. Give them the courage to embody grace in its entirety. And this is a huge part of the book. A huge part of the book is dedicated to taking you away from what a certain doctrine says, taking you away from what you might morally believe to be true. Like, she talks about it. She says, perhaps you hold the view that homosexuality is a sin. Perhaps you hold the view that liberals and communists are the scum of the earth. Perhaps you hold the view that abortion is not right. Whatever. Perhaps you hold all of those views. Perhaps you hold the view that purity is necessary and those who are impure are wrong. Perhaps you have all of those views or any of those. It should not and cannot permit me um, to not allow you grace. It cannot stop me from giving you that space that you rightfully have. It cannot stop me from showing grace, from extending grace. And it shouldn't stop you either. And it's a beautiful middle ground, I feel, where she talks about more than loyalty to an idea, more than loyalty to God, more than loyalty to a doctrine. We need to be loyal to people, which is exactly what politicians get wrong at a lot of the times, which is exactly what governments get wrong a lot of the times, which is what you and I can get wrong a lot of times. We hold our ideas um, at to at a pedestal. We hold them so close to us. We become the idea that we want to propagate, and we forget that we are human beings. What we say in theory, in history, will not really matter. In the grander scheme of things, does not really matter. What matters is how we are with people. And a lot of it, of course, is again based on Christian teaching and the Bible. She bases a lot of her arguments on the Bible because she is a Lutheran pastor, and she holds, she's the head of a church that is primarily meant for misfits or those who were wronged by the church or who felt or experienced spiritual trauma. Her church is called House for All Saints and Sinners. It's based in Denver in the US, of course, and it is, she continuously talks about that, about creating space for the misfits, creating space for those who might not fit your spectrum of normal, might not appear in your spectrum of normal or passable. So and she starts the book, in fact, in a very, very smart way, and I want to mention it here. um, she gives the example of something called the center pivot irrigation system. Now, I know how it sounds. I will just explain what it is. The center pivot irrigation system was something that revolutionized the farming methods in America in the 1940s. It's a form of, it's a method of farming, okay, and the way that it works is that it works primarily for the center. By that I mean that the irrigation system works in a way that the crops that are nearest to the center, the crops that are nearest to the system, um, they of course get all the water and they get the nourishment that they need. But in doing so, it also marginalizes a whole lot of other crops. It puts everyone who's not at the center in the margins, completely ignored and left to dry up. And she talks about that, and she uses that metaphor to explain what the church has done for a lot of years in the way of its teachings, in the way of its problematic teachings. Um, and again, I want to mention that the cheatings, the teachings in themselves may or may not be problematic. The teachings in themselves are not the problem. It is the behavior of the church. It is how you implement those teachings. It is how you carry them on. How you treat people on the basis of those teachings. That is the problem. So she talks about that the church is at the center. The people who fit the church's model of what people should be like. For example, the people who are cisgender and heterosexual in heterosexual relationships, um, who who fit all of that. They are at the center, of course, who derive nourishment from the church and who derive inspiration and who follow the church's doctrines. But those who fortunately, unfortunately, do not fit that model, they are at the margins. They are on the margins. They don't get to come close to God. And that is the biggest problem. That is what we as a society, as a community, need to fight against. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. It doesn't matter whether you believe there is a supreme being, whether you know, believe in the idea, in the concept of religion, whether you want to support it or not. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. What matters is how you treat people. What matters is how you behave with people. And if an idea stops you from extending grace, then you need to kind of let go of that idea. And again, coming back to the purity culture and all of that about the pursuit of good, the biggest example, and she mentions this in the book, she gives the example of this, she gives this one instance, this beautiful anecdote of one of her parishioners. And I want to mention here that the book is full of anecdotes. It is an anecdotal book, I think. I would want to call it that. The multiple chapters are dedicated to different parishioner stories and their relationship with their churches and consequently themselves. So one of those parishioners that personally I personally fell in love with, and I almost cried when I was reading her story. And her name is Cindy, and she belonged to a Pentecostal. Did I say Pentecostal? Pentecostal church, very conservative, and she grew up with the teaching, with hearing it again and again that homosexuality was a sin, and those who were or had homosexual tendencies would go against God and His plan for them, and they would be sent to hell and all of that stuff. Okay, and she grew up with that, and Cindy talks about how that affected her so deeply that she, because she couldn't find a sense of self, because she couldn't come to terms with who she really was and what she was feeling, because of the dissonance she felt within herself, it led to her um, causing self-harm. It led to her, having a lot of pain in her heart that came out in all the wrong ways. It led to her isolation from friends and family, from herself, from happiness. It led to a lot of troubled decisions. And finally, in a very climactic moment, after all the pain she's been through, that gets, and I would like you to note here, it gets corrected by therapy. It enters a process of healing with the help of therapy, which of course is a huge thing. But anyway, in a very climactic moment, She is in the wilderness one evening. Has gone to a camp and she's in the wilderness in Wyoming somewhere. And she's sitting around a bonfire, and a lot of people are sharing their stories and their life experiences and all of that stuff. And what she does is that she gathers up finally the courage, and in this one moment of freedom, final freedom, and moment of just being at peace, she takes her Bible and she cuts out those pages that had verses that went against homosexuality, or were used by the church to justify its stances on homosexuality. So she cuts them out. She tears those pages and she puts them in the fire. And she holds that Bible still very close to her, and she proclaims that she is finally with God. And she felt closer to God than she ever did in her entire life. And I just wanted to mention that anecdote because I felt like it just encapsulated all of my feelings about the book. It certainly brought me closer to God when I was reading it. I felt like I could relate for the first time to a book that was about religion and about all of these things. So for me, it felt cathartic. I can just imagine what it would have felt for Cindy to have, lived through that. And, just to kind of wrap up this episode, I want to mention again one paragraph from the book that I felt was very, very beautiful. It said, "Holiness is the union we experience with one another and with God. Holiness is when more than one become one, when what is fractured is made whole, singing in harmony, breastfeeding a baby, collective bargaining, dancing, admitting our pain to someone and hearing them say, 'Me too.' Holiness happens when we are integrated as physical, spiritual, sexual, emotional, and political beings. Holiness is a song that has always been sung, perhaps even the sound that was first spoken when God said, 'Let there be light.'" And it's in one of the earliest chapters of the book, and I felt like um, it meant so much to me just to read that, and I knew when I was reading it that I was in for a good ride. And besides that, I think one last thing that I would mention before I end this episode is that I just I want you to read this book because I can't explain in words how I felt when I finished it. I felt like a redemption. I felt grace. I felt kindness. I felt happy. And for me, it was sort of it was this exercise of going back to that teenage version of myself. I'm still a teenager, but that teenage version of myself that was very young and was hearing all these atrocious things being said, and felt so angry and confused and scared. Uh, it was this practice of going back to that girl and saying, "It's fine. It's okay. This is not real. There's so much more out there in the world, and this is not it." So, by questioning, by reading, by writing, you are going to find so much more. And that's the key, that you keep reading and that you keep listening. And that's what I want to end with today. I want you to think about what something that you might have struggled with, and that's something being a message that you received from someone of authority in your life. Some teaching or some doctrine. It could be related to religion, it could be related to God, or it could be any kind of messaging that you received through media, through parents, through peer groups that caused a lot of pain to you, and how you came out of it. I want to know your story. So let me know, and we can have so many more discussions about this. And in the end, I just want to say, be kind to yourselves, be kind to other people, um, be in love, keep reading, and keep listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Now I'm all alone in this